Deep beneath the kingdom of Rondon, past the tortuous corridors of the dungeons of fear and hunger, lies an ancient city that defies the rules of time and space. Mahabra, the city of the gods, stands as a monument to divine abandonment and mortal ambition. Its streets are patrolled by remnants of powers long since departed, by creatures that persist in the absence of their creators. Among these haunting entities, few inspire the same visceral dread as the Harvestman. The Harvestman is not simply an enemy encounter in Fear and Hunger. To many players and analysts of the game, it seems to represent something far more unsettling, something that cuts to the core of what makes this game's horror so uniquely disturbing. Where other horror games might rely on jump scares or grotesque imagery alone, the Harvestman appears to embody a particular kind of nightmare, one that could be interpreted as rooted in the perversion of gentleness, the corruption of affection, and the terrible gap between intention and action. This is a creature that smiles as it pets you, that giggles like a child at play, that seems at first to mean no harm, and then, in an instant, that facade shatters. Fear and Hunger is a game that asks uncomfortable questions about suffering, divinity, and the nature of horror itself. Created by Finnish developer Miro Havarinen and released in December 2018, it combines elements of dungeon crawling, survival horror, and roguelike gameplay into something that feels unlike anything else in gaming. Built in RPG Maker, the game uses its visual simplicity to create space for the player's imagination to fill in the gaps, often with images far more disturbing than anything explicitly shown on screen. The game follows 4 potential protagonists, each with their own reasons for descending into the dungeons beneath Rondon's fortress. There's Kahara, a mercenary desperate for coin to save his family; Darcy, a knight obsessed with rescuing her captain Lagarde; Enki, a dark priest seeking enlightenment through suffering; and Ragnvaldr, a warrior driven by vengeance against those who destroyed his homeland. Each of these characters will face unimaginable horrors in the depths, encounters that test not just their bodies, but their minds and souls. But none of the game's many disturbing encounters quite match the Harvestman for its particular brand of psychological horror. This enemy, found wandering the streets of ancient Mahabra, appears initially almost benign. It smiles, it whistles, it reaches out to pet the player character with what might almost seem like affection. For those first crucial turns of combat, the Harvestman does nothing threatening. It simply stands there, seemingly harmless, seemingly gentle. This is the lure, the false sense of security that makes what comes next so much more terrible. The Harvestman's design was inspired by artwork from Kurt Cobain, specifically a painting used for the cover of the album Montage of Heck, the home recordings. The connection to Cobain's art is fitting, given the musician's own exploration of themes involving pain, disconnection, and the failure of communication. The creature's lanky, mannequin-like appearance, its perpetual smile, its twitchy movements all seem to recall the unsettling aesthetic of Cobain's visual art. A parallel that many players have noted adds layers to the creature's disturbing presence. In this comprehensive exploration, we'll delve into every aspect of the Harvestman's lore and symbolism. We'll examine where it appears in the game, what it represents within Fear and Hunger's broader mythology, and why it has become one of the most memorable and disturbing enemies in modern horror gaming. We'll look at the creature's behavior patterns, its infamous death animation, and what the game's own divine beings have to say about its nature. We'll explore the mechanics of fighting it, the strategies for survival, and the one piece of equipment that can save you from its grasp. More than that, we'll analyze what the Harvestman might mean within the game's broader context. What could it tell us about Fear and Hunger's approach to horror? How might it fit into the game's exploration of divine abandonment, human suffering, and the corruption that lingers in sacred spaces? What can we potentially learn from a creature that seems to seek connection, but can only express itself through violence? These are the questions we'll explore as we journey into the streets of Mahabra and confront one of gaming's most unsettling monsters. So settle in, let the ambient sounds of this video wash over you, and prepare to descend into the ancient city where the Harvestman waits with its terrible smile, ready to pet you gently before showing you what it truly means to harvest. To understand the Harvestman, we must first understand the world it inhabits. Fear and Hunger takes place in a world where gods are real, where divine power shapes reality and where the relationship between mortals and immortals has broken down into something twisted and terrible. This is a world that has known multiple ages of divine rule, each ending in disappointment and abandonment. The gods created humanity, found them wanting and retreated, leaving behind only traces of their presence and power. The kingdom of Rondon sits at the center of Western civilization in this world, a kingdom formed from hundreds of warring tribes and nations unified under one banner. The kingdom claims to follow the will of the gods in its pursuit of power and expansion. But the rewards of this divine mission seem to fall only into the laps of the elite and noble, those sitting comfortably behind castle walls while common folk suffer and die in endless wars. Beneath Rondon's fortress lies a secret that the kingdom would prefer to keep hidden. Here, built over ancient tombs that serve as a nexus between multiple planes of existence, the kingdom established a wartime prison. They called it the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger, using the nightmarish reputation of the ancient tombs to inspire terror in their enemies. What the kingdom didn't fully understand was that these dungeons connected to something far older and more dangerous than they could imagine. Deep beneath the prison levels lies Mahabra, the ancient city of the gods. This place predates human civilization as we understand it. Built to worship and house the old gods, Mahabra existed in an age when divinity and mortality intermingled freely. The city's walls are covered with intricate carvings and writings from an unknown civilization. Its architecture suggests a culture that understood things about reality that modern humans have forgotten. Mahabra was never meant to be a place for ordinary humans. Its streets were walked by gods and those who served them directly. The old gods themselves resided here in the time before they grew disgusted with humanity's narrow-mindedness and selfishness. When the gods departed, the city didn't simply empty. It became something else, a space where the normal rules don't apply, where time and death function differently than in the world above. The new gods tell those who ask about Mahabra that time and space do not follow the same rules in the ancient city. The sun doesn't warm you there. Death is not the same once you walk those streets. These are not metaphors or warnings designed to frighten. They are literal descriptions of a place that exists partially outside normal reality. A city caught between what was and what is, inhabited by remnants of powers that refuse to fully fade. Access to Mahabra requires a specific artifact, the Cube of the Depths. This ancient object was once kept by the Cave Dwellers, a secluded group living in the deepest parts of the dungeons. The cube serves as both key and control mechanism for the beacons of the depths scattered throughout Mahabra. These obelisk-like devices allow manipulation of time itself within the city, permitting travel between the past and present versions of Mahabra. The distinction between past and present Mahabra is crucial. The past version shows the city as it was in its glory, when the new gods had claimed it from the old gods and made it their seat of power. Here the buildings stand intact, the streets are clean, and the city bustles with a semblance of normal activity. But this is an illusion of sorts, a temporal echo. The beings encountered here are not truly alive in the conventional sense. They are echoes, remnants, traces of what once was. The present version of Mahabra tells a different story. Here the city lies in ruins, overrun by nature and time. Buildings have collapsed. Darkness pervades everything. The few creatures that inhabit these streets are even more divorced from normalcy than those in the past. This is Mahabra as it truly is now, abandoned by both old and new gods, left to decay into something neither living nor dead. Throughout both versions of the city, players encounter evidence of the civilization that once thrived here. There are libraries filled with forbidden knowledge, temples dedicated to gods both remembered and forgotten, and ritual circles where dark magic was practiced. The new gods established their seat of power here after claiming Mahabra from the old gods, creating the grand hall where they still gather, sitting in silent judgment over those who would seek to join their ranks. But the process of becoming a new god is itself a trap, part of a cosmic joke played by the old gods on humanity. When ambitious mortals venture into Mahabra seeking divinity, they must pass trials and challenges designed to test their worthiness. If they succeed, they gain the power to travel back in time to the moment when the previous new gods ascended. There, they must kill those gods and take their place, creating a closed time loop that ensures the new gods can never truly change anything. This is the price of godhood in Fear and Hunger's world. You can gain immense power, but you become trapped in an eternal cycle, forever ruling until someone else comes to kill you in the past and take your place. The old gods, particularly Re the moon god, designed this system specifically to prevent humanity from gaining true divine power. They lure ambitious humans with the promise of godhood, then trap them in a loop that accomplishes nothing. Into this broken system came a group known as the Fellowship. In the year 809, 5 individuals ventured into Mahabra, seeking to demand the rights of self-governing for humanity from the old gods themselves. They were Francois, Nilvan, Valtail, Ron Shambara, and a 5th member whose name has been forgotten or erased from history. 4 of them ascended to become new gods. But in doing so, they fell into the same trap as all who came before them. The Fellowship's ascension marked the beginning of what the game calls the Third Age of history. Nilvan became known as the Endless One, with dominion over time and memory. Francois became the Tormented One, driven to suffering by the contradictions of godhood. Valtail became associated with the grand libraries of Mahabra, master of arcane knowledge. Ron Shambara also ascended, though less is known about their specific domain. The 5th member, whose name has been lost to history, apparently never completed the ascension. These new gods still exist in Mahabra during the game's events, though their influence has waned. They sit in the Grand Hall, accessible to those who can navigate the city's secrets. Here they will answer questions about the nature of the world, about the old gods, about Mahabra itself. They speak with the weariness of beings who have lived too long and learned too much. They understand that they are puppets in a game they cannot win, but they continue playing their roles regardless. This is the world of Fear and Hunger, a world where divine power exists but offers no salvation, where ancient cities persist in defiance of normal reality, where the promise of transcendence is always a trap, and where, in the shadows and streets of a dead god's city, things that should not exist continue their lonely vigils, carrying out purposes that no longer make sense, if they ever did. It is in this context, in this place of divine abandonment and cosmic horror, that we encounter the Harvestman, a creature that exists in Mahabra, not as a god or demon, but as something perhaps more disturbing, a being that seeks connection in the only way it knows how, through actions that destroy what it touches. To understand what the Harvestman represents, we must first understand the nature of the gods themselves and what happens when divine influence lingers in a place it has abandoned. Before we can fully grasp the Harvestman's place in Fear and Hunger's mythology, we need to understand the gods who shaped this world and then abandoned it. The old gods are not distant, abstract entities. They are very real forces that directly created and influenced the development of life and civilization. Their departure from the world is not a metaphor for secularization or the death of faith. It is a literal abandonment, driven by disgust at what humanity had become. At the heart of the old gods' mythology stands a primal duality, creation and destruction, embodied in 2 of the oldest and most powerful deities. Grogoroth, the god of destruction and human sacrifice, represents the principle that nothing new can be born without the old first being swept away. He is not evil in the conventional sense, despite his fearsome reputation and his association with blood magic and violence. Rather, he embodies a necessary aspect of existence, the fact that death and destruction pave the way for birth and creation. Grogoroth wishes for blood to be spilled in his name. Yes, but this is not simple sadism. In the world of Fear and Hunger, destruction is seen as part of the natural order. Death is necessary to make room for nascence and growth, the god-gifted blood magic to mankind, teaching them spells like Hurting and Black Orb, offensive incantations that harness destructive force. Those who align themselves with Grogoroth through sacrifice and worship gain terrible power, but at a cost. The Black Witch and Yellow Mages who wield his magic become fragile, their bodies corrupted by the dark forces they channel. Grogoroth is described as a curious god, more so than many of his kin. To relieve the feeling of fear when interacting with humans, he wears the bodies and skins of men and women alike. Some believe he still walks among mortals, masked under the flesh of people and hanging bodies, though his presence is fading. His runic symbol depicts an eclipse, representing the blocking out of light, the temporary victory of darkness over day. Opposite Grogoroth stands Sylvian, the goddess of love and fertility. She created men and women at the dawn of time, shaping humanity in her own image. Sylvian represents the creative principle, the drive to reproduce and make new life. She wishes only for acts of love to be performed in her name, granting bonds more serious than mortals can imagine. Her magic allows for healing and the creation of marriages, the grotesque fusion of two beings into one that plays a central role in the game's mechanics. But Sylvian's love is not gentle or safe. Her boundless adoration of humanity often warps her followers, reducing them to their most primal instincts. Those who worship her become hedonistic, attempting to relive the days when humanity only desired to procreate. Like Grogoroth, Sylvian originates from the green hue, the plane of the old gods. Many believe she left mankind behind long ago, after realizing that humans could never love her the way she loved them. The relationship between Grogoroth and Sylvian produced a third deity, Venushka, the god of nature. As the offspring of creation and destruction, Venushka represents nature in all its volatility and unpredictability. Like nature itself, Venushka's appearance and temperament are said to change according to the region where the god manifests. Originally peaceful, Venushka grew hostile toward humanity for their careless destruction of the natural world. This three-part division of old gods reflects Hindu mythology, with Grogoroth, Sylvian, and Venushka representing Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu respectively. Another crucial old god is Re, the trickster moon god. Unlike his fellows, Re never entertained the idea of humans ascending to godhood. He is jealous and deceptive, determined to sabotage those who desire divinity for themselves. Re's primary weapon is Moonscorch, a cruel affliction he inflicts by bathing humans in his moonlight. Those touched by Moonscorch transform into twisted monsters, their bodies warped to reflect their deepest fears and flaws. While Re plays a smaller role in the first Fear and Hunger game, he becomes the central antagonist of the sequel, Fear and Hunger 2, Termina, where he orchestrates a deadly festival designed to prevent humanity's ascension. The god of the depths represents something different, the forgotten and forsaken. This massive entity was worshipped by outcasts living in darkness, including insects, rats, crows, and mysterious creatures. The god of the depths' body lies dormant in the deepest part of the dungeons, in a place called the Gauntlet. Within this enormous corpse, the pathway leads to the very bottom of the dungeons, where other powers linger. The god of the depths was eventually killed, its body used as a vessel to give birth to the god of fear and hunger. These old gods shaped the world and its creatures, but they grew disappointed with humanity. Each human interpreted the pure ideas of the gods differently, corrupting their essence with mortal selfishness, narrow-mindedness, and ambition. The gods couldn't understand why humans failed to grasp the purity and beauty of the concepts they represented. And so, disgusted by what they had created, the old gods began to depart from the mortal plane. But the gods could not simply vanish. Their presence had become too deeply woven into the fabric of reality. So instead, they left behind traces, fragments of their being that still enforced their will and beliefs on the world. These traces are not the gods themselves, but they are not separate from them either. They are what remains when a god withdraws its direct attention from the world, the metaphysical residue of divine power. Traces of Grogoroth can be found in the deepest part of the Gauntlet, inside the body of the god of the depths. This manifestation of the god of destruction appears to those who venture that far, serving as one of the final bosses in the game. The traces of Grogoroth possess immense power, wielding attacks that can instantly kill party members and inflict curses that count down to certain death. Fighting this entity is a confrontation with destruction itself, with the primal force that tears down the old to make way for the new. The old god's departure created a power vacuum that ambitious humans attempted to fill. The first to succeed was Ulmer, the Ascended One. Sometimes called the last of the old gods, Despite being born human, raised by a virgin mother, and supposedly sired by a false god, Allmer gathered 12 apostles to bring down the old world order and usher in a new one. Corrupt kings and sultans captured and crucified him, but Allmer ascended into Mahabre and returned with divine power. He murdered the kings and sultans, bringing forth a new world order centered around himself. Year 0 in the game's calendar marks the birth of Allmer's new self. But Allmer's ascension worried the old gods, particularly Rare. They didn't want humanity to gain true divine power, so they designed the new god system as a trap. Mortals could claim godhood by passing trials in Mahabre and traveling back in time to kill the previous new gods. But this created a closed loop that prevented any real change. The new gods gained immense power, but became trapped in an eternal cycle, ruling until someone else came to kill them in the past. This is the divine landscape of fear and hunger. Gods who created humanity and then abandoned it in disgust. A system designed to prevent mortals from achieving true transcendence, and a world littered with the traces and remnants of departed divinity. In this context, creatures like the Harvestman begin to make sense. They are the detritus of a world touched by gods and then left behind. They exist in the spaces the divine once occupied, carrying out actions that might have once had purpose, but now serve only to perpetuate suffering. The new gods, when asked about the Harvestman, provide a crucial piece of information. They say that the Harvestman is unable to satisfy the needs of his victims, so he resorts to more violent ways of pleasure. This statement reveals something important. The Harvestman is not simply a monster or demon, it is a being with desires, with needs it attempts to fulfill. But something prevents it from achieving satisfaction through normal means, so it turns to violence as a substitute. This can be seen as mirroring the broader story of Fear and Hunger's gods. They created humanity seeking something, perhaps worship, perhaps companionship, perhaps simply the satisfaction of creation. But they were unable to find what they needed from their creation. Humans couldn't love Sylvian the way she loved them. They couldn't understand the purity of Gro-Goroth's destruction. They twisted and corrupted every divine gift into something selfish and narrow. And so the gods, unable to satisfy their needs through normal interaction with humanity, departed, leaving behind only traces and violence. The Harvestman, in this interpretation, could be seen as a symbol of that divine disappointment and disconnection. A being that seeks something it cannot find, that reaches out in what might be affection, but can only express itself through harm. It exists in Mahabre, the city of the gods, which raises the possibility that it might be a final echo of divine presence in a place that has been abandoned. And like the gods themselves, it persists long after its purpose has ceased to make sense, carrying out actions that satisfy nothing and no one. The Harvestman's visual design immediately sets it apart from most other enemies in Fear and Hunger. While the game features many grotesque and disturbing creatures, the Harvestman achieves its unsettling quality through a different approach. It is not overwhelmingly monstrous or immediately threatening in appearance. Instead, it occupies an uncanny valley, appearing almost human but distorted in ways that trigger deep unease. The creature stands tall and lanky, with an elongated mannequin-like body. Its limbs are disproportionately long and thin, giving it an unstable, twitchy quality. The Harvestman's movements are jerky and unpredictable, as if it doesn't fully understand how to operate the body it inhabits. This awkward animation contributes significantly to its disturbing presence. We instinctively recognize human-shaped things that move incorrectly as dangerous or wrong. The Harvestman's face wears a constant smile, but this is not a smile of happiness or benevolence. It is fixed, unchanging, a rictus that persists regardless of circumstance. The creature's expression never shifts from this eerie grin, even as it whistles, pets the player, or carries out its violent actions. This permanent smile creates a disconnect between action and apparent emotion, suggesting either that the Harvestman doesn't understand social cues or that its internal experience is completely alien to normal psychology. The inspiration for this design comes from artwork by Kurt Cobain, specifically a painting used for the cover of Montage of Heck, the home recordings. Miro Havranen, The developer of Fear and Hunger has explained that the first design came from helping a friend create a cover image for an EP. The connection to Cobain's work is particularly fitting, given the themes both artists explore. Cobain's art often dealt with themes of disconnection, pain masked by superficial normalcy, and the gap between appearance and internal reality. His paintings and drawings frequently featured childlike or naive elements juxtaposed with disturbing or violent imagery. There's a recurring sense in Cobain's work of trying to communicate something important but being unable to find the right language, of reaching out for connection, but having that reach be misunderstood or rejected. These themes resonate deeply with the Harvestman's characterization. The creature exhibits childlike behaviors. It giggles like a child. It pets the player the way a young person might pet an animal. It seems to be playing even as it commits atrocities. But this childlike quality makes its violence more disturbing, not less. We understand instinctively that something is very wrong when innocent behaviors and extreme violence exist in the same entity without any apparent recognition of the contradiction. The Harvestman's voice work, performed by developer Harvestman himself, adds another layer to its unsettling presence. The creature whistles, makes small sounds of apparent contentment, and giggles in a way that seems genuinely pleased. These sounds are not menacing or hostile. They suggest that the Harvestman is enjoying itself, that it finds pleasure in what it's doing. But the actions it takes while making these happy sounds are anything but pleasant. In the game's code and design, the Harvestman exhibits unusual behaviors that set it apart from normal enemies. The overworld entity frequently gets stuck walking in place when reaching map limitations, creating a glitchy, unnatural appearance as it tries to move through barriers. It will sometimes initiate battle from seemingly impossible situations, appearing through objects or from far away. These quirks might be simple programming limitations, but they contribute to the sense that the Harvestman doesn't follow normal rules, that it exists partially outside the game's normal logic. The creature's immunity to out-of-battle damage reinforces this otherworldly quality. Arrows pass through the Harvestman without effect. Bear traps don't trigger when it walks over them. It cannot be harmed by conventional means outside of direct combat. This could suggest that the Harvestman is not simply a physical being, but something else, perhaps a manifestation of Mahabra itself, given form by the city's twisted nature. When players encounter the Harvestman, they typically experience a sequence of emotions carefully orchestrated by the game's design. First comes uncertainty. The creature doesn't immediately attack. It just stands there, smiling, whistling, reaching out to pet. Players who have experienced Fear and Hunger's brutal difficulty might be relieved by this apparent respite. Maybe this enemy is different. Maybe it won't hurt them. Then comes confusion as the Harvestman continues its docile behavior. Turn after turn, players might try talking to it, and the game provides responses that suggest the Harvestman is lost in its own world, looking around at the houses, streets, towers, and sky. It seems to blush when addressed. It giggles gently. These behaviors create cognitive dissonance. How can something so seemingly innocent exist in this horrific place? Finally comes the terror when the Harvestman suddenly shifts gears. Without warning, it attempts to grab the player, initiating a coin flip that, if failed, leads to instant death. The creature that seemed harmless reveals its true nature, but even this violence is performed with the same giggling, childlike demeanor. The Harvestman doesn't become angry or aggressive in a conventional sense. It simply transitions from petting to killing as if both were equally pleasant activities. This design philosophy reflects Fear and Hunger's broader approach to horror. The game understands that the most disturbing things are often not the most obviously monstrous. Instead, horror comes from the violation of expectations, from the corruption of what should be safe or gentle, from the realization that appearances mean nothing in a world this broken. The Harvestman could have been designed as a hulking, clearly dangerous monster. Instead, it was made into something that seems almost pitiable, almost innocent, right up until it reveals what it truly is. Early concept art for the Harvestman shows the evolution of its design. Initial sketches experimented with different levels of human resemblance and monstrous features. The final design struck a balance, keeping the creature recognizable as vaguely human-shaped while distorting those proportions enough to create unease. The permanent smile was always a key feature, as was the lanky, elongated body. These elements combine to create something that registers as wrong on a primal level, triggering our instinctive wariness of things that look almost but not quite human. The Harvestman's coloration in the game contributes to its eerie quality. Its skin appears pale, almost corpse-like, suggesting either death or the absence of normal life. There's no indication of breath or other biological functions. It simply exists, perpetually smiling, perpetually whistling, perpetually reaching out to pet things that it will then destroy. This static quality reinforces the sense that the Harvestman is not truly alive in a conventional sense, but is rather a manifestation of something else, a physical form given to a concept or emotion that cannot naturally take shape. The Harvestman does not appear in the dungeons proper or in the early areas of fear and hunger. Players will never encounter this entity in the prison levels, the mines, or the catacombs. The Harvestman is exclusive to Mahabre, and even within that ancient city, it appears only in specific locations and circumstances. This limited placement is deliberate, making the Harvestman a late-game encounter that players face only after they have descended into the depths and unlocked the secrets of the City of the Gods. The primary location for Harvestman encounters is the past version of Mahabra, accessed through the beacons of the depths using the Cube of the Depths. In this temporal echo of the city's former glory, Harvestmen can be found patrolling the streets to the east of the Grand Library. This placement near the library is thematically appropriate, as the Grand Library represents knowledge and enlightenment, while the Harvestmen embody something that cannot be understood through learning alone. Players can also reach a portion of past Mahabra through a different method, by reading the Passages of Mahabra, a rare book found on bookshelves throughout the dungeons. This tome allows temporary transportation to an inaccessible area of past Mahabre. The visit is time-limited, with the player gradually fading away and returning to their original location. Harvestmen patrol this region as well, making them a significant threat to players seeking the rare loot available in this area. Another location where Harvestmen appear is near the Tower of Endless, but only under specific circumstances. After entering the Tower of Endless in past Mahabra and sleeping in the bed at its apex, the player experiences a dream sequence showing memories of the four protagonists. Upon awakening and returning to Mahabre from this dream, Harvestmen will appear near the tower where they were not present before. This suggests a connection between the dream sequence, the memories it reveals, and the manifestation of Harvestmen in that location. The Tower of Endless holds special significance in Fear and Hunger's lore. It serves as one of the few safe saving locations in the game, a rare respite in an otherwise brutal experience. The bed at the tower's summit can be used to save without risk of ambush, unlike most beds in the game. But this safety comes with a price, the dream sequence that triggers when sleeping there. This dream transports the player to a version of Rondon, the kingdom above the dungeons, but one that exists in dream logic rather than normal reality. Here the player witnesses fragmented memories and disturbing scenes, including a glimpse of Pocket Cat, a malevolent entity that appears more prominently in the sequel. The dream shows perspectives from all four potential protagonists, including deeply traumatic memories from characters' pasts. After experiencing this dream and confronting the Skin Granny boss at its conclusion, the player receives the soul of the Endless from Nilvan, the Endless One. This encounter ties directly into the game's overarching narrative about creating a new god of fear and hunger. But it also seems to have the side effect of causing Harvestmen to manifest near the tower, as if the dream sequence and the recovery of the soul somehow weakens the barriers that keep such entities at bay. The fact that Harvestmen appear specifically in Mahabre and not in the dungeons above tells us something important about their nature. They are fundamentally creatures of the divine realm, unable or unwilling to exist in spaces untouched by godly presence. Mahabre's unique properties, its position outside normal time and space, its history as the dwelling place of gods, these factors allow the Harvestmen to persist there. They are native to that broken, abandoned divine space in a way they could never be native to the mundane world. This placement creates an interesting progression in Fear and Hunger's horror. Early game enemies are relatively straightforward threats: guards, prisoners, and mutated creatures that can be understood as natural, if dangerous, inhabitants of a dark dungeon. As players descend deeper, the enemies become more grotesque and unnatural. But it's only upon reaching Mahabra that players encounter entities like the Harvestman, beings whose very existence seems to violate normal logic and whose behaviors suggest alien psychologies. The environmental storytelling of Mahabra reinforces this sense of wrongness. The past version of the city shows grand architecture, wide streets, and evidence of advanced civilization, but it's empty in a peculiar way. The few beings that do exist here seem out of place, remnants that have no business being in a functioning city. The Harvestmen patrol streets that have no living residents to protect or threaten. They carry out their routines in the absence of any apparent purpose, like actors continuing to perform long after the audience has left. In the present version of Mahabra, the one existing in current time, the atmosphere shifts. Here the city lies in ruins, overgrown and decaying. Buildings have collapsed. Darkness has reclaimed much of the space. The few creatures that persist in this version are even more divorced from normalcy. They exist in a dead city, carrying out actions that have lost all context. The Harvestmen, should they appear in this version, would be even more clearly purposeless. Entities that continue their behaviors because they know nothing else, not because those behaviors achieve anything. The design choice to place Harvestmen specifically in past Mahabra, accessed through time manipulation, adds another layer of meaning. These creatures exist in a temporal bubble, a frozen moment where the city still functions in some capacity. They are trapped in the past just as the new gods are trapped in their time loop. The Harvestmen patrol streets that will eventually crumble, smiling at passers-by who are just temporal echoes carrying out their terrible actions in a version of the city that no longer truly exists. This placement also means that players who reach Mahabara cannot simply leave and return to easier areas. The game's structure forces confrontation with these late-game horrors. Having descended into the depths and unlocked the secrets of the Divine City, players must navigate its dangers or die trying. The Harvestmen become part of the gauntlet that tests whether players are worthy of reaching the game's endings, whether they have the skill and knowledge to survive in a place where the rules are different. While most encounters with the Harvestmen follow a consistent pattern, there exists a unique interaction in Fear and Hunger that reveals something crucial about the creature's nature. This special scene only occurs in Terror and Starvation mode, the game's hardest difficulty setting, and only when very specific conditions are met. The player must have the girl as a party member, and they must pass by a particular hole in a wall in Mahabra's temple district. When these conditions align, the game presents one of its most unsettling sequences. As the party walks past the hole, the Harvestman suddenly reaches out and snatches the girl, removing her from the party instantly. There is no warning, no chance to prevent this. The creature simply takes her. Players who have grown attached to this mysterious child, who have protected her through the horrors of the dungeons, must now watch helplessly as she is pulled through the wall by the smiling entity. The girl is not an ordinary party member. She is found in a cage on the first floor of the dungeons, a silent child who never speaks but can communicate her desires through gestures. The game never explicitly states who she is until much later, but careful players can piece together clues. She is the daughter of Nilvan, the Endless One of the new gods. Her destiny, should the player achieve ending A, is to become the god of fear and hunger herself, ascending to divine power through terrible suffering. Having the girl in the party changes the texture of Fear and Hunger's horror. Suddenly, the player is responsible not just for their own survival, but for protecting a child from the dungeon's many threats. She is just as vulnerable to fear, hunger, damage, and death as any adult party member. She can lose limbs, become infected, starve, or go insane. The game does not soften its brutality because a child is present. If anything, her presence makes every danger feel more terrible, every moment of suffering more cruel. So when the Harvestman snatches her, the player's immediate reaction is panic. Where has she been taken? Is she hurt? Can she be saved? Following the trail leads to one of the Harvestman's regular patrol locations on the streets of Mahabra. And here, the scene that greets the player is profoundly disturbing, precisely because it appears superficially gentle. The Harvestman is found sitting with the girl, stroking her head with its long-fingered hand. The creature seems to be petting her the way one might pet a beloved animal or comfort a distressed child. There is no immediate violence, no obvious harm being done. The girl has not been killed or mutilated. She simply sits there while the Harvestman pets her, the creature's permanent smile unchanged, perhaps even suggesting contentment. This tableau is disturbing on multiple levels. First, there's the obvious danger. Players familiar with the Harvestman know what it's capable of, know the violence hidden behind that gentle petting. Seeing the girl subjected to those touches, even when they appear harmless, creates tremendous tension. We wait for the other shoe to drop, for the petting to transition into something terrible. But more unsettling is the implication that the Harvestman might genuinely believe it is being kind. The creature doesn't seem to be taunting the player or intentionally causing distress. Its behavior suggests it thinks this is care, that it has taken the child to comfort or protect her. This innocent intent makes the scene more horrible, not less. It reveals the vast gulf between what the Harvestman believes it is doing and the reality of its actions. The scene can also be read as a twisted reflection of divine attention. The girl is the daughter of a god, destined to become a god herself. Here she sits under the ministrations of a creature that exists in the divine city, being tended to by something that might be a remnant of divine presence. The Harvestman's treatment of her could be seen as a corruption of the care a divine being should show, affection that has been warped into something horrifying by the broken nature of Mahabra and its inhabitants. To progress and retrieve the girl, the player must kill the Harvestman. There is no option to talk it into releasing her, no peaceful resolution. The creature must be destroyed in combat, following the same deadly patterns it exhibits in normal encounters. This necessity means that rescuing the girl requires the player to risk a coin flip death themselves, gambling their run on the chance to save a single party member. Many players report that this scene stays with them long after they've finished the game. There's something about the specific horror of seeing a child in the Harvestman's grasp, watching it pet her with those long fingers, knowing what those same fingers do to their victims. The game has already established the girl as someone worth protecting, someone whose suffering feels particularly unjust, even in a world full of injustice. Seeing her vulnerable to the Harvestman's attentions taps into primal protective instincts. This special encounter also reinforces the Harvestman's thematic role as a being that seeks connection, but can only cause harm. It has taken the girl away from her protectors, perhaps believing it is saving her from danger. It pets her, probably believing this is an expression of care or comfort, but its nature prevents these actions from achieving their intended effect. The girl is not comforted, she is in danger. The Harvestman's touch, no matter how gentle it appears, is always a prelude to violence. The encounter also raises disturbing questions about what would have happened if the player hadn't found the girl. How long would the Harvestman have continued petting her? Would it have eventually tired of this and moved on? Or would the violence have inevitably emerged, as it always does with this creature? The game doesn't answer these questions, leaving players to imagine scenarios that are invariably worse than anything shown on screen. From a design perspective, this special encounter serves multiple purposes. It rewards players for choosing terror and starvation mode with a unique scene they wouldn't otherwise witness. It provides additional characterization for the Harvestman, showing that its behavior is consistent. It pets before it kills, whether the victim is an adult adventurer or a young child. And it creates a memorable moment of horror that emerges naturally from the game's systems rather than being forced through a cutscene. The scene also connects to broader themes in Fear and Hunger about the vulnerability of innocence in a corrupted world. The girl, who should be protected and nurtured, instead becomes another victim of Mahabra's horrors. The divine city, which should be a place of transcendence and power, instead harbors entities that pervert the very concepts of care and gentleness. The Harvestman, which might seek to comfort, can only cause suffering. Fighting the Harvestman is unlike fighting most other enemies in Fear and Hunger. While the game is filled with difficult and dangerous encounters, the Harvestman presents a unique challenge that stems not from overwhelming strength or complex attack patterns, but from a specific mechanic, the coin flip attack that results in instant death. Understanding how this combat encounter functions requires examining both the specific mechanics involved and how they connect to Fear and Hunger's broader design philosophy. When combat with a Harvestman begins, the creature does not immediately attack. On the first turn, it will only smile, whistle, and pet the player character. Mechanically, this means it takes no hostile action that deals damage or inflicts status effects. For players unfamiliar with the Harvestman, this behavior can create false security. The battle has begun, but nothing bad is happening. Perhaps this enemy is different from the others encountered in Mahabre's dangerous streets. The second turn continues this pattern initially. The Harvestman maintains its gentle behaviors, still smiling, still whistling, still reaching out to pet. It makes small sounds of contentment. Its sprite remains relatively static, showing none of the aggressive animations that typically signal an incoming attack. Players might begin to wonder if combat will ever truly begin, if there's some way to end the encounter peacefully. Then, at the end of the second turn, everything changes. The Harvestman attempts to grab the player character, initiating the coin flip sequence. This sudden transition, after 2 turns of docile behavior, creates a spike of panic. The player must quickly choose heads or tails, making a decision that will determine whether their character lives or dies. The coin flip mechanic is central to Fear and Hunger's design philosophy. Throughout the game, many crucial moments are determined by a 50-50 chance. Will you successfully loot a chest, or will it be trapped? Will you rest safely at a bed, or will an enemy attack? Will you survive an enemy's special attack, or will you die instantly? This emphasis on chance reflects the game's roguelike influences and creates tension by ensuring that no amount of skill or preparation can guarantee success. For the Harvestman's attack specifically, the coin flip works as follows. The player is prompted to choose heads or tails. The game then flips its metaphorical coin. If the player's choice matches the result, they successfully avoid the grab and combat continues normally. If the choice doesn't match, the Harvestman grabs the player character and the infamous death sequence begins. There are ways to improve one's odds. Players can use lucky coins, special items that boost the chance of success from 50% to 75%. By holding down the Shift key when making the heads or tails selection and having a lucky coin in inventory, the player sacrifices that coin for better odds. This can mean the difference between life and death in an encounter with the Harvestman. However, there is one exception to the coin flip danger: the Penance Armor. This unique piece of equipment makes the wearer immune to the Harvestman's grab attack. When wearing the Penance Armor, the player can face a Harvestman without fear of the instant death coin flip. This seems like a perfect solution, except that the Penance Armor comes with its own terrible costs. The Penance Armor is inspired by the Berserker armor from Berserk, but its implementation in Fear and Hunger is even more brutal. Once put on, the Penance Armor cannot be removed. Ever. The mechanisms in the armor seal shut when it closes, and spikes dig so deeply into the wearer's flesh that removing the armor would cause death. The game explicitly states that once you step into the Penance Armor, it becomes part of you for the rest of your life. These spikes don't just dig into any flesh. They specifically target the genitals, making the Penance Armor a device of continuous sexual torture. This prevents the wearer from participating in many of Fear and Hunger's mechanics, particularly the marriage system and the various rituals to the gods that require nudity. The armor offers incredible protection, making the wearer nearly invincible against most attacks, but at the cost of permanent suffering and the loss of certain gameplay options. Using the Penance Armor to fight Harvestmen safely thus requires accepting this permanent sacrifice. Players must decide whether avoiding the coin flip death is worth spending the entire rest of their run in inescapable torture armor. This creates an interesting risk versus reward calculation. Is it better to rely on chance and potentially die to the coin flip, or to lock yourself into the Penance Armor and lose access to other options? For players who don't use the Penance Armor and who fail the coin flip, the result is one of the game's most disturbing death sequences. The Harvestman grabs the player character and carries them to a corner of the city. What follows is described partially through text and partially through sound design, with the game wisely leaving many details to the player's imagination. The exact nature of the violence is implied rather than explicitly shown, making it somehow more terrible. The death sequence begins with the Harvestman breaking the player character's limbs. This is not a quick or clean process. The creature takes its time, systematically snapping bones while giggling like a child playing with a toy. The sound effects during this sequence are deliberately uncomfortable, wet cracks and snaps that suggest organic material being destroyed. All the while, the Harvestman maintains its happy demeanor as if this violence is a form of play or pleasure. After breaking the character's limbs, rendering them completely helpless, the Harvestman proceeds to what the game's lore refers to as harvesting the character's genitals. This sexual violence is not shown graphically on screen, instead being implied through sound effects and the character's positioning. The game leaves most of the details to the player's imagination, which often conjures scenarios worse than anything that could be explicitly depicted. Throughout this entire sequence, the Harvestman continues giggling and making sounds of contentment. There is no anger or aggression in its behavior. It seems genuinely pleased, as if it has finally found a way to satisfy its needs. This lack of hostility makes the violence more disturbing. Based on its behavior, the Harvestman appears to harm not out of rage or malice, but because this may be the only way it knows to interact, to fulfill desires that it cannot satisfy through gentler means. The player character's sprite shows no reaction to what's happening. There are no expressions of pain, no screaming, no struggle. This absence of visible suffering can create a darkly comedic disconnect for some players, as if the character is simply bored while being horrifically violated. But it can also be read as shock, the complete shutdown of the psyche in the face of trauma too severe to process. After this sequence concludes, the game over screen appears. The player's run ends. Any progress made toward completing the game is lost. This is the true cost of failing the Harvestman's coin flip. Not just the horror of the death itself, but the practical consequence of having to start over, losing hours of careful progression through Fear and Hunger's brutal challenges. For players who succeed at the coin flip or who wear the penance armor, the question becomes how to actually defeat the Harvestman in combat. The most effective strategy is to target the creature's head immediately. Using powerful attacks like Black Orb or the Priest's Lantern can quickly remove the Harvestman's head, preventing it from using its grab attack in future turns. Once beheaded, the Harvestman becomes far less dangerous, though it can still use other attacks if it has limbs remaining. Alternatively, players can target the torso, which is generally easier to hit and has reasonable hit points. Destroying the torso kills the Harvestman outright, ending the encounter. However, this takes more turns than simply removing the head, creating additional opportunities for the creature to attempt its grab attack. Each turn the Harvestman survives is another chance for the dreaded coin flip. The combat design surrounding the Harvestman reflects Fear and Hunger's philosophy of informed risk-taking. Players who understand the threat can prepare accordingly, whether by equipping the penance armor, stocking lucky coins, or ensuring they have the damage output to kill the creature quickly. But even with preparation, there's always an element of chance. The coin flip can fail even with improved odds. RNG can cause your attacks to miss the Harvestman's head, giving it more opportunities to grab you. This uncertainty creates tension that persists even on repeated playthroughs. Veteran players who have faced Harvestmen dozens of times still feel anxiety when the combat begins, knowing that no amount of experience can guarantee survival. The coin flip cares nothing for player skill or game knowledge. It is pure chance, reflecting the arbitrary and uncaring nature of the world. Fear and Hunger presents. Some players argue that this reliance on coin flips is unfair, that instant death mechanics based on pure chance are poor game design. They point to the Harvestman as a prime example of Fear and Hunger's tendency toward frustrating rather than fair difficulty. Why should hours of careful progression be ended by a 50-50 chance? But this perspective misses how the coin flip mechanics could serve the game's thematic purposes. Fear and Hunger is not simply about overcoming challenges through skill and perseverance. It appears to be about navigating a world where arbitrary forces can destroy you regardless of how well you've prepared. The coin flips can be interpreted as representing the random, uncaring nature of suffering in the game's universe. Sometimes you survive through luck rather than merit. Sometimes you die despite doing everything right. The Harvestman, with its giggling demeanor and instant death grab, could be seen as embodying this philosophy perfectly. It presents as harmless, creating a moment where players might relax their guard. Then it strikes without warning, forcing a life or death decision based on pure chance. There's a certain cruel honesty to this design. The game isn't pretending that safety exists or that good preparation always leads to survival. It shows players that in Mahabharata, in this broken world of departed gods and corrupted divinity, even the gentlest seeming touch can kill you. The Harvestman's death sequence has become infamous in horror gaming communities, frequently cited as one of the most disturbing death scenes in any game. But what makes it so effective? Why does this particular sequence of events, largely implied rather than explicitly shown, linger in players' minds long after they've finished Fear and Hunger? To understand the death animation's power, we need to examine both what it shows and what it doesn't show, how it uses sound and suggestion to create horror that exceeds anything a more graphic depiction might achieve. The sequence begins with the Harvestman successfully grabbing the player character after a failed coin flip. This is shown through a transition where the character sprite is moved away from its normal position. The Harvestman carries them to a corner of the city, away from the main streets. This spatial movement is important. The creature takes its victim to a secluded spot, suggesting both predatory behavior and perhaps a warped sense that what it's about to do requires privacy. Once in the corner, the screen darkens slightly and a specific piece of music begins playing. This track is unsettling, using dissonant notes and an irregular rhythm to create auditory unease. The music doesn't build to a crescendo or follow traditional horror game scoring. Instead, it maintains a consistent level of wrongness, like background noise that you can't quite block out. The composition suggests both the Harvestman's childlike nature and the horror of what's happening, creating a cognitive dissonance that heightens the scene's disturbing quality. The text box describes what's happening in clinical terms. The Harvestman proceeds to break your limbs slowly. This matter-of-fact language is more effective than elaborate description would be. The game doesn't tell you how much it hurts or describe your character's suffering in detail. It simply states the action being taken, leaving your imagination to fill in the sensory details of having your bones systematically broken. The sound design during this portion is crucial to the scene's impact. Players hear wet, organic sounds, cracks and snaps that clearly indicate bones breaking. These are not clean sounds. They have a moist quality that suggests flesh and blood, not just the brittle breaking of something hard. The sound designer understood that bone breaking is not a dry snap, but a complex noise involving all the soft tissue surrounding the bone, the rupturing of blood vessels, the tearing of ligaments and tendons. Throughout this, the Harvestman giggles. This is not a sinister villain laugh, but something more innocent and therefore more disturbing. It sounds genuinely amused, like a child who has found a new game. The giggles are breathy and slightly high-pitched, recalling the way young people laugh when they're excited or pleased. This vocalization creates a profound disconnect between the action and its emotional context. The Harvestman is enjoying itself in a simple, pure way while committing atrocities. After the limbs are broken, the violence continues in ways that the game leaves largely to implication rather than explicit description. The text becomes less specific at this point, but the sounds and positioning suggest what's occurring. The verb harvest in the creature's name takes on its full terrible meaning. The game implies sexual violence through context, sound effects, and the new god's earlier statement about the Harvestman being unable to satisfy the needs of his victims and resorting to more violent ways of pleasure. What exactly is happening is left deliberately ambiguous in the game's text. The game provides uncomfortable sound effects that suggest ongoing violation, but it doesn't spell out the specific acts in words. This ambiguity serves multiple purposes. It allows players with different sensitivities to interpret the scene at their own level, while also ensuring that most players will imagine something worse than anything that could be specifically depicted. The game's lore provides some additional context through the new gods' statement that the Harvestman is unable to satisfy the needs of his victims, and thus resorts to more violent ways of pleasure. This suggests that the sexual violence is a twisted attempt at intimacy, a failure to achieve connection through normal means. The Harvestman isn't satisfying its victims' needs because it's destroying them in the process of trying. Throughout the entire sequence, the player character's sprite remains static, showing no change in expression or posture. This absence of visible reaction can be interpreted in multiple ways. Perhaps the character has gone into shock, their mind shutting down to protect itself from trauma. Perhaps they're already so broken that they can't respond. Or perhaps, as some players darkly joke, they're simply bored by the whole ordeal, a gallows humor response to the game's unflinching brutality. The animation ends with a fade to black and the game over screen. There's no recovery from this death. Unlike some enemies in Fear and Hunger, where particularly gruesome deaths result in the character surviving but maimed, the Harvestman's attack always kills. There is no aftermath to witness, no lingering as an injured survivor. The character simply ceases to exist, and the player must start over. What makes this sequence more effective than a more graphically explicit depiction would be? Several factors contribute. First, the game wisely understands that imagination is often more disturbing than reality. By providing just enough detail to establish what's happening while leaving specifics ambiguous, it allows each player's mind to generate the version of events that they personally find most horrifying. A specific, detailed depiction might shock some players while leaving others unmoved, but an implied scene can disturb a wider audience. Second, the contrast between the Harvestman's happy demeanor and the violent actions creates cognitive dissonance that our brains find deeply unsettling. We're wired to associate smiling and giggling with safety and positive interactions. When those signals appear alongside violence, we experience a fundamental confusion that manifests as horror. The Harvestman isn't performing evil, it's playing. That reframing of extreme violence as innocent play is more disturbing than straightforward sadism would be. Third, the sound design does tremendous work in selling the horror. The specific choices of wet snaps, organic squelches, and childlike giggles create an audio landscape that suggests the full horror of the scene without requiring visual depiction. Our auditory processing is closely linked to emotional responses, and carefully crafted sound can trigger disgust and fear more effectively than visuals because it's harder to look away from sound. Fourth, the clinical, matter-of-fact text descriptions create an emotional distance that somehow makes events worse. If the text were florid and melodramatic, describing the agony in elaborate detail, players might dismiss it as overwrought. But the simple statements, "The Harvestman proceeds to break your limbs slowly," delivered without embellishment, feel more real and therefore more horrible. Finally, the permanence of this death matters. This isn't a setback. It's a complete ending of this run. The time invested, the progress made, the resources gathered, all of it is lost because of one failed coin flip. This mechanical consequence reinforces the emotional impact of the death itself. The Harvestman doesn't just kill your character, it kills your run, forcing you to start over and re-experience earlier portions of the game. This creates a practical reason to fear the creature beyond simple disgust at its methods. The death animation has sparked considerable discussion in gaming communities about the line between effective horror and gratuitous sexual violence. Some argue that the scene is necessary, that it perfectly exemplifies Fear and Hunger's unflinching approach to dark subject matter and creates legitimate horror through its implications. Others contend that sexual violence, even implied, crosses a line, and that the game uses shock value in place of genuine horror craft. Both perspectives have merit. The Harvestman scene is undeniably disturbing and uses sexual violence as a primary source of that disturbance. But it also serves thematic purposes within the game, reinforcing ideas about the failure of connection, the corruption of gentleness, and the arbitrary cruelty of the world. Whether that thematic service justifies the content is a question each player must answer for themselves. What's undeniable is the scene's effectiveness at creating lasting horror. Players remember the Harvestman death sequence long after forgetting other, more graphically violent scenes in the game. It has become a shorthand in discussions about Fear and Hunger's approach to horror, a reference point for what makes the game so uniquely disturbing. In achieving that memorable impact, regardless of how one judges its content, the death animation succeeds at its primary function, creating fear. At its core, the Harvestman can be interpreted as representing a particular horror: the corruption of gentleness into violence, the perversion of care into harm, the failure of connection despite apparent desire for it. To understand what makes this creature so symbolically rich, we need to examine how it could embody themes that run throughout Fear and Hunger, and connect to broader philosophical questions about communication, intimacy, and the nature of harm. The most obvious symbolic element is the Harvestman's behavior pattern. It pets before it kills. It smiles and giggles throughout its violence. This juxtaposition creates a narrative about what could be interpreted as the failure of innocent intentions. The Harvestman appears to genuinely believe its actions are kind or pleasurable. There's no indication that it understands the harm it causes. It reaches out to pet the player character the way one might pet a beloved animal, with apparent affection. But affection without understanding is dangerous. Touch intended as comfort can become violence when the one touching doesn't comprehend their own strength or the fragility of what they touch. A child might pet an insect to death, not understanding that their gentle touches are crushing blows to something so small and delicate. The Harvestman operates on this logic, treating human victims the way a naive child might treat insects, with affection that destroys. This connects to the new god's statement that the Harvestman is unable to satisfy the needs of his victims. The creature appears to have desires, which could include a desire for connection or intimacy based on its petting behavior. It reaches out to others, seemingly attempting to fulfill these needs. But something prevents it from achieving satisfaction through normal means. One interpretation is that it doesn't understand human physiology or psychology. Another possibility is that the creature is alien enough that what feels pleasurable to it is agony to humans. Whatever the underlying cause, its attempts at what might be intimacy consistently fail, leaving both the Harvestman unsatisfied and its victims destroyed. The sexual nature of the Harvestman's violence adds another layer to this symbolism. Sexual intimacy requires understanding, consent, and mutual pleasure. It's perhaps the ultimate form of human connection, requiring vulnerability and trust from both parties. When these elements are absent, when one party seeks satisfaction without regard for the other's needs or limits, sex becomes violence. The Harvestman could be seen as embodying this corruption perfectly, attempting something that should be intimate but lacking all the elements necessary to make it anything but horror. The creature's childlike behaviors further complicate this symbolism. Children are innocent. They cause harm through ignorance rather than malice. When a child hurts someone, we generally don't ascribe evil intent. We recognize that they're learning, that they don't yet understand consequences or others' perspectives. The Harvestman's giggling and simple behaviors recall this childhood innocence, suggesting that its violence might not be malicious but merely ignorant. But this reading doesn't fully excuse or explain the horror. Even if the Harvestman is innocent in its intent, the results are the same. Victims destroyed, their bodies violated, their suffering ignored. The creature's potential innocence doesn't make it less dangerous. If anything, it makes it more terrifying, because there's no reasoning with it, no way to make it understand. An intelligent, malicious enemy might be negotiated with or outsmarted. An innocent enemy that doesn't comprehend the harm it causes is simply a force of destruction that must be avoided or eliminated. The Harvestman can also be read as a potential symbol of failed communication. It seems to want something from its victims, seems to be trying to express or achieve something through its actions. But the gap between its intent and its capability to express that intent results in catastrophe. This interpretation mirrors many forms of human trauma where harm is done not through malice, but through inability to communicate needs or understand boundaries. Abusers often claim they were showing love or teaching lessons through their abuse. Addicts harm their loved ones while believing they're managing their condition or not recognizing the impact of their behavior. The Harvestman's apparent confusion between affection and violence, its inability to satisfy needs without causing harm, reflects these real-world patterns where the gap between intention and action destroys relationships and lives. The creature's design, inspired by Kurt Cobain's artwork, adds another symbolic dimension. Cobain's art often explored themes of childhood trauma, the corruption of innocence, and the pain of being misunderstood. His paintings and drawings frequently featured childlike elements, juxtaposed with disturbing or violent imagery, much like the Harvestman combines playful behaviors with extreme violence. Cobain himself struggled with chronic pain, addiction, and mental illness. His art and music often expressed the feeling of being trapped in suffering, of trying to communicate agony that others couldn't understand or wouldn't hear. The Harvestman, inspired by Cobain's visual aesthetic, carries echoes of these themes. It exists in a state of failed communication, unable to express or satisfy its needs except through violence that achieves nothing and satisfies no one. The creature's location in Mahabre reinforces its symbolic significance. This is the city of the gods, a place that should represent transcendence and divine power. Instead, it's abandoned and populated by broken remnants, like the Harvestman. The creature roams streets that once hosted divine beings, carrying out actions that parody care and connection. It's a symbol of what happens when the sacred is abandoned, when spaces designed for higher purposes are left to decay. In a broader sense, the Harvestman could be interpreted as representing the failure of Fear and Hunger's divine order. The gods created humanity seeking something, companionship or worship, or simply the satisfaction of creation. But they couldn't find what they needed from their creations. Humans were too selfish, too narrow-minded, too incapable of understanding divine perspective. So the gods left, disappointed and disgusted, leaving behind only traces of their presence. The Harvestman is one of those traces, a being that perpetuates the pattern of reaching out for something that can never be grasped, of seeking satisfaction that can never be achieved. It's innocent and monstrous simultaneously, a creature that cannot help but cause harm even as it seeks connection. This paradox makes it a perfect symbol for a world abandoned by its creators, where divine spaces host only corruption and where gentleness itself has become dangerous. The creature also symbolizes a specific fear many people harbor, that someone they trust, someone who appears kind or harmless, might suddenly reveal themselves as dangerous. The Harvestman seems safe for those first crucial turns. It pets, it smiles, it gives every indication of meaning no harm. Then it strikes, transforming from apparent friend to deadly threat in an instant. This mirrors real-world betrayals where people we believed safe turn out to have hidden violent natures. Finally, the Harvestman can be read as a potential symbol of the player's own position in Fear and Hunger. We enter Mahabre seeking power, knowledge, or escape. We interact with systems and entities we don't fully understand. We cause harm, perhaps unintentionally, through our choices and actions. The Harvestman's inability to satisfy needs without destroying what it touches could be seen as mirroring the player's journey through the game, where attempting to achieve our goals often requires sacrificing party members, violating corpses, or participating in dark rituals we don't fully comprehend. In this reading, the Harvestman becomes a dark mirror, showing us what we look like from the perspective of the game world. We're beings with desires and goals who interact with a reality we can't fully grasp, causing destruction in pursuit of satisfaction. The creature's smiling face and childlike behaviors reflect our own innocence, or at least our tendency to see ourselves as innocent even when we're committing atrocities in pursuit of survival or success. To fully appreciate the Harvestman's place in Fear and Hunger's mythology, we need to examine it in context alongside the other entities that inhabit Mahabre. The ancient city hosts many disturbing creatures, each representing different aspects of divine abandonment and cosmic horror. Understanding how the Harvestman compares to and contrasts with these other beings helps illuminate its unique symbolic significance. One of the most memorable Mahabre entities is the Skin Granny, encountered during the dream sequence triggered by sleeping in the Tower of Endless. Like the Harvestman, Skin Granny appears initially harmless, an old lady sitting in darkness. But when battle begins, she reveals her true form: 3 arms, 2 legs, and a menacingly smiling head. Skin Granny uses a coin flip attack similar to the Harvestman's, and failing it results in a unique death sequence where she rips off the player's face. The parallels between Skin Granny and the Harvestman are striking. Both creatures initially appear non-threatening. Both use coin flip instant kill attacks. Both have death sequences that focus on specific, disturbing violence rather than general harm. But their symbolic roles differ. Skin Granny is explicitly tied to Northern mythology, particularly connected to Ragnvaldr's homeland of Oldagor. She represents the nightmares and trauma of a specific culture, manifesting in the dream sequence that shows the protagonist's memories. The Harvestman, by contrast, has no clear cultural origin. It simply exists in Mahabharata, not tied to any character's past or any specific mythology. This makes it feel more fundamentally part of the city itself, a native entity rather than a visitor or projection. Where Skin Granny is understood as a dream manifestation, the Harvestman is real within the game's logic, actually patrolling the streets rather than appearing only in mental spaces. Another significant Mahabharata entity is the traces of Grogoroth, the manifestation of the old god of destruction that serves as one of the game's final bosses. Unlike the Harvestman, Traces of Grogoroth is explicitly divine, a direct remnant of one of the world's creator gods. The Traces possess immense power and multiple devastating attacks, representing destruction on a cosmic scale. The Harvestman's violence is intimate and personal by comparison. Where Grogoroth embodies universal principles of destruction and rebirth, the Harvestman operates on an individual level, seeking connection with specific victims. This makes the Harvestman's horror more relatable and therefore potentially more disturbing. We can intellectually grasp being destroyed by a force of cosmic destruction. It's harder to process being destroyed by something that seemed to want to care for us. The Yellow King, another major Mahabharata encounter, represents failed ascension and corrupted godhood. This entity is what Legard becomes if he successfully ascends, but the player chooses to fight rather than submit to him. The Yellow King has immense power, but uses it to perpetuate suffering and maintain control. His presence speaks to the corruption inherent in the new god's system, the way that achieving divine power traps you in a cycle of violence. The Harvestman shares with the Yellow King a quality of tragic corruption, of something that might have been benign becoming terrible. But where the Yellow King's corruption is tied to ambition and the seeking of power, the Harvestman's corruption seems more fundamental, perhaps existing before it took physical form. The Yellow King chose his path. The Harvestman may have no choice at all about what it is or what it does. Throughout Mahabharata, players also encounter various guards and priests, human or formerly human enemies, who have been transformed or corrupted by prolonged exposure to the city. These enemies show what happens to mortals who spend too much time in divine spaces. They become twisted, losing their humanity while gaining terrible power. Some attacks they use can inflict infections or curses, spreading their corruption to others. The Harvestman differs from these corrupted humans in important ways. It doesn't seem to have ever been fully human, lacking the tragedy of a fall from grace. It simply is what it is, without apparent knowledge that it could be anything else. Where corrupted humans retain enough memory of their former selves to make their transformation tragic, the Harvestman's nature appears complete and uncomplicated. It cannot fall because it was never elevated. The city also hosts various environmental hazards and cursed locations. Ritual circles where dark magic was practiced still emanate power. Ancient artifacts lie scattered in ruins, waiting to corrupt anyone foolish enough to use them without understanding their true nature. These environmental threats represent the lingering danger of divine presence, the way that spaces touched by gods remain dangerous long after those gods depart. The Harvestman can be understood as a potentially mobile version of these environmental hazards. It could be seen as corruption given form and agency, patrolling the streets as what appears to be a living embodiment of Mahabharata's twisted nature. Where a cursed ritual circle waits passively for someone to trigger it, the Harvestman actively seeks out victims, pursuing the satisfaction of needs that can never be met. Comparing the Harvestman to other enemies in the base game before reaching Mahabra highlights how the creature represents an escalation of fear and hunger's horror. Early enemies like prison guards and cave dwellers are dangerous but comprehensible. They attack because they're hostile or territorial or hungry. Later enemies like the human Hydra or Crow Mauler are more disturbing, showing evidence of unnatural creation or corruption. But even these creatures operate on understandable logic. The human Hydra is aggressive because it's been created through Sylvian's twisted rituals. The Crow Mauler attacks because it's a territorial predator protecting its nest. You can understand their motivations even if you can't sympathize with them. The Harvestman's motivations, by contrast, remain opaque. Does it even have motivations in the conventional sense, or does it simply act out patterns it cannot comprehend? This fundamental incomprehensibility makes the Harvestman more frightening than stronger or more overtly dangerous enemies. You can't negotiate with it, can't predict its behavior beyond the basic pattern of pet then grab, can't understand what it wants or why it exists. It's a reminder that in Mahabra, not everything can be understood or reasoned with. Some horrors simply are, and your only options are to avoid them or destroy them before they destroy you. The Harvestman's integration into Mahabra's ecosystem of horrors serves multiple game design purposes. It provides variety in enemy encounters, ensuring that players can't rely on a single strategy. It teaches players to be wary of apparently harmless NPCs, a lesson that carries over into other encounters, and it could be seen as embodying themes about the city itself, that divine spaces abandoned by their creators become homes to corrupted remnants, that gentleness and violence can coexist in disturbing ways, that understanding and communication can fail completely. In the hierarchy of Mahabra's threats, the Harvestman occupies a unique position. It's not the most powerful enemy. The traces of Gro-Goroth, or god of fear and hunger, far exceed it in raw strength. It's not the most strategically dangerous. The Skin Granny's dream sequence encounter or the various ambush enemies pose greater challenges to careful players. But the Harvestman may be the most psychologically disturbing enemy in the city, the one that lingers in memory after stronger threats have been forgotten. This psychological impact stems from the creature's ability to corrupt our understanding of fundamental concepts. After encountering the Harvestman, players can't help but feel uneasy when enemies don't attack immediately. The early game habit of considering non-hostile NPCs as potentially safe or friendly becomes compromised. The Harvestman teaches a dark lesson. In Mahabra, gentleness itself cannot be trusted, because even affection might be just a prelude to violence. Surviving encounters with the Harvestman requires more than just understanding its mechanics. Players must develop strategies that account for the creature's unique threat profile while integrating those strategies into their broader approach to navigating fear and hunger's brutal challenges. This section explores the various approaches players have developed for dealing with Harvestmen, from cautious avoidance to aggressive elimination, and examines how these strategies reflect different philosophies about how to engage with the game's systems. The most straightforward strategy for dealing with Harvestmen is simply to avoid them. In past Mahabra, where the creatures patrol specific routes, observant players can learn their patterns and navigate around them. The game doesn't force confrontations with most Harvestmen. They can be left alone, allowed to continue their endless patrols while the player pursues other objectives. This approach minimizes risk, preserving resources and avoiding the danger of the coin flip. However, avoidance has its costs. Harvestmen sometimes patrol near areas containing valuable loot or important locations. Avoiding them might mean missing items that could prove crucial later. Additionally, leaving enemies alive creates the possibility of accidentally triggering combat if the player makes a navigational mistake or forgets where they've seen Harvestmen before. The creature's unusual movement patterns and tendency to initiate combat from unexpected distances make them difficult to track reliably. For players who choose to fight, the most common strategy involves swift, decisive action. The optimal approach is to kill the Harvestman before it can attempt its grab attack. This typically means targeting the head with powerful attacks immediately when combat begins. Spells like Black Orb, if available, can remove the head in a single hit. The Priest's Lantern, an item that inflicts heavy damage to heads, also works well. Even for physical attackers, focusing all damage on the head during those first 2 turns can neutralize the threat before the grab attack occurs. This aggressive strategy requires good resource management throughout the run. Having the spells or items necessary to quickly kill Harvestmen means investing in them earlier, potentially at the cost of other useful options. Players must balance preparing for specific threats, like the Harvestman, against maintaining flexibility for unexpected challenges. This creates interesting build considerations. Should you prioritize items that make Harvestmen safe, or invest in tools for other parts of the game? The Penance Armor represents an alternative strategy that trades permanent consequences for safety against specific threats. Players who acquire and equip the Penance Armor become immune to the Harvestman's grab, eliminating the coin flip risk entirely. This allows them to fight Harvestmen with complete confidence, treating them as regular enemies rather than instant death threats. The armor also provides excellent physical defense, protecting against many other attacks throughout the game. But the cost is severe. The Penance Armor cannot be removed, ever. The spikes dig so deeply into flesh, particularly targeting the genitals, that removing the armor would kill the wearer. This creates permanent suffering for the character and locks out various gameplay mechanics. The wearer cannot participate in marriages, cannot perform certain rituals, cannot use items that require nudity. For some players, this trade-off is acceptable. For others, losing access to these options outweighs the safety the armor provides. An interesting emergent strategy involves using the Penance Armor temporarily for specific segments, then deliberately dying and continuing with a different character. Fear and Hunger allows dead characters to be left behind, while other party members continue. Some players have developed strategies where one party member puts on the Penance Armor, serves as a tank for difficult areas, including Harvestman-heavy sections of Mahabre, then is sacrificed once that utility is no longer needed. This approach treats party members as resources to be expended, rather than companions to be protected. It's ethically questionable within the game's narrative, but mechanically sound. The Penance Armor wearer can safely scout dangerous areas, draw enemy attacks, and trigger traps, effectively serving as disposable protection for more valuable party members. This strategy exemplifies Fear and Hunger's emergent gameplay, where creative use of cruel mechanics can lead to effective strategies the developers may not have explicitly intended. Lucky coins play a crucial role in Harvestman strategies for players who don't have or won't use the Penance Armor. Stockpiling these items throughout the run provides insurance against coin flip attacks. By holding shift when selecting heads or tails and consuming a lucky coin, players improve their odds from 50% to 75%. Multiple lucky coins mean multiple attempts with improved odds, significantly increasing survival chances. However, lucky coins have other uses throughout Fear and Hunger. Many chests and environmental hazards also use coin flips, and lucky coins can improve odds for those as well. Players must decide how to allocate this scarce resource. Should you save lucky coins for Harvestmen specifically, use them on promising chests, or spread them across all coin flip situations. This resource management adds another layer of strategic depth. Some players deliberately trigger Harvestman fights for tactical advantages. The special scene where a Harvestman kidnaps the girl, while disturbing, provides a guaranteed Harvestman location that can be prepared for. Players can scout the area, set up optimal positioning, and prepare their strongest attacks before triggering the encounter. This transforms a random threat into a controlled challenge, though it requires accepting that the girl will be kidnapped and sit under the Harvestman's attention while you prepare. Community guides and strategies for dealing with Harvestmen have evolved over time as players have mapped the creature's patterns and tested various approaches. Early guides simply marked Harvestman locations as extreme danger zones to be avoided. Later guides provided specific tactics for fighting them, noting that removing the head prevents the grab attack and suggesting optimal party compositions for quick kills. Recent strategy discussions focus on risk assessment and resource allocation. When is it worth fighting a Harvestman? How many lucky coins should you use? At what point in a run does the Penance Armor become worth its costs? These questions don't have universal answers. The correct strategy depends on the specific run's circumstances, available resources, and the player's broader objectives. Speedrunners have developed specialized strategies for dealing with Harvestman when they can't be avoided. Some speedrun routes use the penance armor despite its drawbacks, because the time saved by not worrying about coin flip deaths outweighs the lost flexibility. Other routes carefully navigate around all Harvestmen, using precise movement and route planning to minimize exposure to the creatures. Still others accept that some runs will end to Harvestman coin flips and simply restart when that happens, treating the instant deaths as run-enders rather than challenges to overcome. The meta-strategy of accepting deaths and restarting reflects a certain philosophy about Fear and Hunger's design. The game uses permadeath and random elements to create tension, but experienced players understand that not every run needs to succeed. Sometimes you die to bad luck, and that's acceptable. The goal isn't to win every attempt, but to eventually achieve victory. This mindset transforms Harvestman deaths from frustrating failures into simply another reason to try again. Multiplayer variation and community challenge runs have created unique scenarios involving Harvestmen. Some players impose rules like must kill all Harvestmen or cannot use penance armor, artificially increasing difficulty and forcing creative problem-solving. These self-imposed challenges demonstrate mastery of the game's systems while providing entertainment for viewers and prestige within the community. Successfully completing a no-penance armor run where all Harvestmen are defeated requires excellent execution and significant luck with coin flips. The way players talk about Harvestmen in community spaces reveals the psychological impact these enemies have. They're frequently described with nervous humor, acknowledged as disproportionately scary relative to their actual mechanical threat. Players share stories of close calls, successful coin flips that saved runs, and tragic deaths that ended promising attempts. The Harvestman has become a sort of mascot for Fear and Hunger's arbitrary cruelty, a symbol of how the game can destroy you regardless of how well you've prepared. This reputation means that new players often hear about Harvestmen before encountering them, arriving at Mahabre already primed with fear. This anticipation can actually enhance the horror of the first encounter. When the Harvestman appears, smiling and whistling, players recognize what they're facing. They know the grab is coming. The two turns of apparent safety become unbearably tense because players understand they're the calm before the storm. This dramatic irony, where the player knows what the character doesn't, creates unique psychological tension. Ultimately, every player must develop their own approach to Harvestman based on their playstyle, risk tolerance, and available resources. Some players prepare extensively, ensuring they have every tool needed to safely handle these encounters. Others accept the risk, relying on luck and quick reflexes to survive. Still others simply avoid the creatures entirely, treating them as environmental hazards to be navigated around rather than enemies to be defeated. Each approach is valid within Fear and Hunger's flexible design. The game doesn't mandate one correct strategy, but instead provides multiple tools and allows players to choose their path. This flexibility means that Harvestman encounters can be as dangerous or as safe as players make them through preparation and planning. But regardless of strategy, the creature's presence in Mahabre ensures that traversing the ancient city always carries an element of dread. The knowledge that around any corner might wait a smiling figure with long fingers, ready to pet you gently before showing you what true horror means. The Harvestman's impact extends beyond Fear and Hunger itself, influencing discussions about horror game design and becoming a reference point for a particular type of psychological horror. To understand this legacy, we need to examine how the creature has been received by players and critics, how it compares to other memorable horror game enemies, and what it reveals about effective horror design in the indie game space. When Fear and Hunger first released in 2018, it operated largely under the radar, building its audience gradually through word of mouth and streaming content. The game's extreme difficulty and dark subject matter meant it appealed to a specific audience. Players seeking uncompromising horror experiences willing to engage with disturbing content. As this audience discovered and discussed the game, the Harvestman emerged as one of the most talked-about enemies, a frequent subject of YouTube videos, Twitch streams, and forum discussions. Part of the Harvestman's memorability comes from its contrast with typical video game enemies. In most games, enemies signal their threat level through appearance and behavior. Larger, more visually impressive enemies are generally more dangerous. Aggressive, overtly hostile enemies attack immediately. The Harvestman violates these conventions, appearing relatively simple visually and behaving passively initially, then revealing extreme danger suddenly. This violation of player expectations creates a memorable shock. The creature also stands out for how it uses implications rather than explicit depiction. Many horror games rely on graphic violence and explicit imagery to create shock value. The Harvestman's death sequence is horrifying specifically because it suggests rather than shows, leaving disturbing details to player imagination. This approach recalls classic horror cinema's understanding that what you don't show can be more effective than what you do, a principle often lost in modern media's tendency toward graphic explicitness. Horror game analysts and designers have pointed to the Harvestman as an example of effective enemy design that creates dread rather than just challenge. Many difficult enemies are memorable for their mechanical complexity or high damage output. The Harvestman is memorable despite being relatively simple mechanically. Its threat comes not from complex attack patterns, but from a single, devastating move combined with psychological manipulation through its false passivity. This efficiency of design is instructive for indie developers working with limited resources. The Harvestman doesn't require complex animations or detailed art assets. Its horror comes from behavior, sound design, and implications, elements that can be implemented effectively even on a tight budget. For developers seeking to create memorable horror enemies without AAA resources, the Harvestman provides a template for achieving maximum impact with minimal assets. The creature's inspiration from Kurt Cobain's artwork has created interesting discussions about the intersection of music culture and game design. Some players who recognize the Cobain connection read additional layers into the Harvestman, seeing it as a commentary on depression, the failure of communication, or the tragedy of seeking connection while being unable to achieve it safely. Whether these readings were intended by the developer or not, they enrich the creature's symbolism and create opportunities for analysis that extend beyond the game itself. In comparisons with other notable horror game enemies, the Harvestman often gets mentioned alongside creatures like Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2 or the Baby from Resident Evil Village. These enemies share certain qualities: iconic designs that become instantly recognizable, behaviors that violate player expectations, and symbolic significance that invites interpretation beyond simple mechanics. But the Harvestman distinguishes itself through its specific brand of corrupted gentleness, a niche not commonly explored by other horror enemies. Pyramid Head, for instance, embodies punishment and sexual guilt, his violence explicitly aggressive and purposeful. The Baby represents vulnerability weaponized into threat, innocent appearance hiding genuine danger. The Harvestman occupies different thematic space, representing well-intentioned violence, affection that destroys, desire for connection that can only manifest as harm. This specific psychological terrain makes it unique even among memorable horror game enemies. The Harvestman has also influenced discussions about sexual violence in horror games. The creature's death sequence necessarily involves this content, and its presence has sparked debates about when such content serves artistic purposes versus when it becomes gratuitous. Fear and Hunger's unflinching approach to dark subject matter means it constantly navigates this line, and the Harvestman exemplifies both the game's strengths and its most controversial aspects. Critics who praise Fear and Hunger's handling of sexual violence point to how it's presented as genuinely horrific rather than titillating, how it serves thematic purposes about the corruption of intimacy, and how it's positioned within a broader context of suffering rather than being exploitative. Critics who condemn it argue that sexual violence in entertainment always carries the risk of normalizing or trivializing real trauma, regardless of artistic intent, and that the Harvestman's scene crosses lines that shouldn't be crossed even in mature rated horror games. This debate has no simple resolution, but the fact that the Harvestman prompts such discussions speaks to its impact. The creature has become a focal point for larger conversations about the role of extreme content in horror games, the responsibilities of developers working with traumatic subject matter, and the difference between horror that challenges and horror that merely shocks. In terms of meme culture and community jokes, the Harvestman has achieved a certain dark notoriety. Players share screenshots of the creature's smiling face with captions joking about its deceptive harmlessness. Streamers encountering Harvestmen for the first time provide entertaining content as they realize the danger. The creature has entered the informal lexicon of Fear and Hunger players, mentioned as shorthand for sudden, terrible deaths. This mimetic quality doesn't diminish the Harvestman's horror. If anything, it reinforces it. The nervous laughter and dark jokes players employ when discussing the creature serve as defense mechanisms against genuine discomfort. The fact that players need these defense mechanisms speaks to the Harvestman's effectiveness at creating lasting psychological impact. From a game design perspective, the Harvestman demonstrates how indie developers can create memorable content through careful attention to psychology rather than relying on production values. The creature's effectiveness doesn't come from high-poly models, motion-captured animation, or celebrity voice acting. It comes from understanding what creates unease in players and ruthlessly executing on that understanding. This lesson has influenced other indie horror developers, many of whom cite Fear and Hunger as inspiration for their own projects. The success of the Harvestman's design has encouraged developers to explore similar psychological territory, creating enemies that violate expectations, that corrupt familiar concepts like gentleness or care, that use implication and suggestion rather than explicit depiction. The Harvestman also stands as evidence that difficulty and horror can reinforce each other when properly balanced. The creature isn't just scary in a narrative sense, it's mechanically dangerous in a way that creates genuine stakes. Players fear encountering Harvestman not just because of the disturbing death sequence, but because that death ends their run, erasing progress and forcing restart. This integration of mechanical consequence with narrative horror creates more effective dread than either element could achieve alone. Looking at Fear and Hunger, 2, Termina, the sequel released in 2022, it's notable that the Harvestman doesn't return. The sequel features many new enemies and a different setting, the town of Preheville rather than the dungeons and Mahabra. This decision to not reuse the Harvestman suggests that developer Miro Havarinen understood the creature's effectiveness was tied specifically to its context, to its role in Mahabra's ecosystem of horrors. Rather than diminishing the Harvestman's legacy, its absence from the sequel reinforces its special place in the original game. It remains unique to Fear and Hunger, a specific horror that belongs to the ancient city and cannot be transplanted elsewhere. This exclusivity makes the creature more memorable, more tied to the experience of descending into Mahabra and confronting the remnants that dwell there. As Fear and Hunger continues to find new audiences through YouTube videos, Twitch streams, and gaming communities, the Harvestman maintains its position as one of the game's most discussed elements. New players approaching the game have often heard about the creature before encountering it, arriving at Mahabra with anticipation mixed with dread. This reputation preceding the actual encounter creates unique tension, turning the streets of past Mahabra into psychological minefields where every humanoid figure might be the smiling threat players have been warned about. The Harvestman's legacy extends beyond Fear and Hunger itself into broader discussions about what makes horror effective in interactive media. Unlike films or books, where the audience is passive, games require player agency. The Harvestman leverages this agency cruelly, making players choose heads or tails, forcing them to gamble on their survival. This interactivity makes the horror more personal. When you die to a Harvestman, it's partially your choice, your failed coin flip, even though the outcome was determined by chance. This player responsibility for their own horror is uniquely suited to the gaming medium. Finally, the Harvestman represents Fear and Hunger's broader philosophy that horror comes from the violation of what should be safe or good. The ancient city should be a place of transcendence. Divine beings should offer salvation. Gentle touches should comfort. But in the broken world of Fear and Hunger, all these expectations are inverted. The city is a tomb, the divine is absent or monstrous, and gentleness destroys. The Harvestman embodies this inversion perfectly, a creature whose apparent kindness is always a prelude to violence, whose smile never changes even as it commits atrocities, whose childlike giggles accompany the worst moments of a victim's life. In the pantheon of memorable video game enemies, the Harvestman has earned its place not through overwhelming power or elaborate design, but through psychological precision. It understands what frightens players on a deep level and ruthlessly exploits that understanding. It violates expectations, corrupts familiar concepts, and creates scenarios that linger in memory long after the game is finished. That's the mark of truly effective horror design, and it's why years after Fear and Hunger's release, players still speak with nervous respect about the smiling figure that patrols Mahabre's ancient streets, always ready to pet you before harvesting what remains. As we emerge from the depths of Mahabre and the analysis of one of its most disturbing inhabitants, we're left with a fuller understanding of why the Harvestman has become such an iconic element of Fear and Hunger's horror. This creature, inspired by Kurt Cobain's unsettling artwork and brought to life through careful design choices, represents far more than a difficult enemy or shock value content. It embodies the game's core themes about divine abandonment, the corruption of gentleness, and the failure of connection in a broken world. The Harvestman succeeds as horror because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the mechanical level, it's a dangerous enemy with an instant kill attack that creates genuine stakes. Failing to handle a Harvestman correctly means losing your run, erasing hours of careful progress. This practical threat ensures players can't simply dismiss the creature as narrative window dressing. It has teeth, mechanically speaking, and those teeth can end your journey through Fear and Hunger's nightmarish depths. On the atmospheric level, the Harvestman contributes to Mahabre's unique sense of wrongness. The ancient city should feel abandoned, but instead feels watched. It should be silent, but instead echoes with whistling and giggling. The Harvestman, patrolling eternally through streets that no longer serve any purpose, seems to embody the city's quality of being trapped between existence and oblivion, neither fully alive nor completely dead. On the symbolic level, which we've explored extensively, the Harvestman can be interpreted as representing the corruption at the heart of Fear and Hunger's world. It's a being that seems to seek something, possibly connection or intimacy, but can only express that desire through violence. It pets before it kills, smiles while it destroys, giggles as it violates. This corruption of innocent behaviors into horrific ones could be seen as mirroring the broader corruption of divine purpose into abandonment, of sacred spaces into tombs, of transcendence into a trap. The creature's design demonstrates how indie developers can create memorable horror without massive budgets or teams. The Harvestman's effectiveness comes from understanding player psychology, from violating expectations, from using sound design and implication rather than graphic depiction. It proves that horror's most powerful tool is often the player's own imagination, triggered by careful suggestion rather than explicit presentation. What makes the Harvestman linger in memory long after playing Fear and Hunger is how it corrupts safety. After encountering this creature, you can never quite trust apparent harmlessness in the game again. Every peaceful NPC becomes suspect. Every gentle gesture might be prelude to violence. The Harvestman teaches that in Mahabre, in this abandoned divine city where normal rules don't apply, even smiles can be weapons and affection can kill. This lesson extends beyond Fear and Hunger into broader observations about horror. The most frightening things are often not the overtly monstrous, but the familiar made wrong, the safe made dangerous, the loving made harmful. We have instincts that tell us when to be afraid, and effective horror subverts those instincts, making us doubt our ability to identify threats. The Harvestman appears to weaponize this subversion, seeming harmless until the moment it reveals its true nature, teaching players to trust nothing. As Fear and Hunger continues to influence indie horror game development, the Harvestman stands as a template for how to create memorable enemies through psychological precision rather than production values. Developers looking to craft effective horror on limited budgets can study this creature's design, learning how behavior, sound, and implication can create impact that exceeds what any amount of graphical fidelity could achieve. For players who have descended into Mahabre and faced the Harvestman, the experience creates a specific kind of gaming memory. Not just "I defeated a tough boss" or "I saw something scary," but rather "I encountered something that fundamentally disturbed me," something that made me question basic assumptions about how video game enemies should behave. This destabilization is what lasting horror achieves. It doesn't just startle or gross out. It changes how you see the game world, how you evaluate threats, how you understand the fiction you're engaging with. The Harvestman also serves as a reminder that horror games can explore genuinely dark psychological territory while still serving artistic purposes beyond mere shock. The creature isn't just disturbing for its own sake. It contributes to Fear and Hunger's broader examination of suffering, divinity, and what happens when divine spaces are abandoned. It raises questions about the nature of harm, the failure of communication, and whether intention matters when the result is destruction. These are uncomfortable questions, and not everyone will appreciate Fear and Hunger's unflinching approach to exploring them. The game's extreme content, including the Harvestman's death sequence, has generated legitimate criticism and debate. Where you fall on these debates likely depends on your personal relationship with horror as a genre and your beliefs about the role of challenging content in entertainment. But regardless of where you stand, the Harvestman's effectiveness at creating horror is difficult to deny. As we close this comprehensive exploration, we return to that image, a lanky figure with a permanent smile, walking the abandoned streets of a divine city, reaching out to pet anyone it encounters. Behind that smile lies violence. Behind that gentle touch waits horror. Based on its behavior, the Harvestman may not even know it's a monster. It perhaps believes it's being kind, that it's satisfying needs and creating connection. If this interpretation holds, then the gap between belief and reality, between intention and effect, is infinite. And in that gap, Fear and Hunger finds some of its most disturbing horrors. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of horror gaming's most unsettling creatures. The Harvestman represents everything that makes Fear and Hunger such a unique and disturbing experience. The corruption of innocence, the failure of divine purpose, and the terrible price of existing in a world abandoned by its creators. Whether you've played the game yourself or simply wanted to understand what makes this enemy so memorably horrifying, I hope this exploration has illuminated the careful craft and psychological precision that makes the Harvestman work as horror. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Fear and Hunger's lore, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I regularly create long-form explorations of video game lore and symbolism, focusing on games that reward careful analysis and close reading. Hit the notification bell to be alerted when new videos drop, and check out the description for links to related content about Fear and Hunger and other horror games. And remember, if you ever find yourself in an ancient city of gods, walking streets that shouldn't exist, and you see a smiling figure approaching with long fingers, ready to pet you, run. Run and don't look back. Some touches are kind, some are deadly, and in Mahabra they're often the same thing. Sweet dreams.